Grace Thompson had never imagined that helping a wounded child could change her life in a single night. But that morning, when the first rays of sunlight touched the dusty ground, she saw 40 Apache warriors kneeling outside her farmhouse. She hadn't even known the child's name when she carried him across the creek. To her, he was just a boy in need, and it was the right thing to do. But now, standing before her was something that no one, not even the most daring stories of the frontier, could have prepared her for. She had been alone in the world for so long. A quiet farm girl, she worked the land, dealt with the animals, and never asked for much. But the weight of this moment, with the warriors kneeling on her doorstep, felt like something out of a legend. What had she done to deserve this kind of attention? The wind carried the smell of the earth, the scent of horses, and the deep, heavy silence of the morning. The warriors had arrived in the early hours, as silently as the dawn itself. The air was thick with anticipation, but Grace could barely move, caught between fear and awe. She had heard tales of the Apache before, stories told by travelers who feared their name, but seeing them here, on her land, was something entirely different. As the leader of the group stood and stepped forward, Grace felt a chill run down her spine. His eyes were sharp, and his movements, even in the early light, were calculated, precise. The warriors didn't speak, but their presence was deafening. She could feel their gaze, their scrutiny, as if they were waiting for something. The man was tall, with a weathered face and markings that seemed to tell stories of battles fought and lands traversed. The way he looked at her, it was not with hostility, but with something else. Respect. She had no idea why, but the respect in his eyes felt like a weight, one that she didn't know how to bear. The warrior's hand slowly reached into a pouch tied around his waist, and for a moment, Grace's heart stopped. What was he going to do? Would they harm her for helping the child? But then, with deliberate slowness, he produced a small, weathered bracelet made of leather and beads. It glinted in the morning light. As he held it up before her, "You saved my daughter," he said in a voice that was low and firm. "She was lost, and you helped her." The words took a moment to sink in, but when they did, Grace's breath caught. She recognized the child now. The limping boy, the one she had carried across the creek. But the daughter of the warrior? This was more than she had ever expected. The leader's voice carried authority as he continued. "The tribe has seen your act of kindness. It will not go unthanked." With that, he motioned, and one by one, the 40 warriors behind him rose from their kneeling positions. The air seemed to shift, the tension that had hung heavy moments before now replaced by an eerie calm. Grace stood frozen, unsure of what to do, her heart still racing. The sight before her was surreal. These men, warriors of a proud people, had come not to harm her, but to honor her. She had expected anger, or at least a demand, but instead, they were offering something else. Gratitude. The leader stepped closer, and Grace instinctively took a small step back. The warmth of the morning sun felt like the only thing anchoring her to reality. "You will not be forgotten," he said, the words a promise, as he placed the bracelet in her trembling hands. "This is a token of our thanks. You have shown mercy, and mercy is never forgotten." Grace held the bracelet, its weight strange in her palm. She didn't know what to say, didn't know if words could ever express the turmoil of emotions swirling inside her. Gratitude, confusion, fear, all of them clashed within her as she looked at the leader, whose expression softened ever so slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, though the words felt inadequate. "You saved a life," he replied simply, his gaze never leaving her. "And now we honor you." The warriors moved away, their footsteps light and silent, as though they had never been there at all. But Grace knew that she would never forget this moment. She had helped a child, and in return, the child's people had come to honor her. A small act of kindness, and the world had shifted around her. As the last of the warriors disappeared into the horizon, Grace stood at her door, staring at the bracelet in her hands, unable to fully grasp the weight of the change that had just occurred. She had never expected anything in return, but she had received more than she could ever imagine. As the days passed, Grace Thompson could not shake the feeling of being watched. The warriors had come and gone, but the events of that morning lingered in her mind like the echo of thunder after a storm. The strange, heavy silence that had settled on her farm seemed to carry an invisible weight, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Grace tried to return to her daily routine, tending to the animals, working the fields, but something had changed. The familiar sounds of the creek, the chirping of birds, and the rustle of the wind through the trees felt different, almost distant. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see those same warriors reappear at any moment. It wasn't fear she felt, but a deep sense of unease. She couldn't help but wonder what it all meant. The bracelet the leader had given her felt heavy in her pocket, a constant reminder of that strange encounter. She had never asked for anything in return for helping the child. All she had done was offer kindness, a simple act of humanity. But now, with the warriors gone and the world still, she felt like a part of her had been taken, a part of herself left behind in that moment when the tribe had knelt before her. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the land, Grace was standing by the barn when she heard the unmistakable sound of hooves. The noise was distant at first, but it grew louder, and soon she could see a figure riding towards her. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it them again? Had they come to take something back, or was there more to the story? As the rider drew closer, Grace could make out his silhouette, a man on horseback, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat. He wasn't one of the Apache warriors she had seen that morning, but there was something about him, a quiet determination in the way he rode. Grace felt her pulse quicken as he approached, her mind racing with thoughts of what might come next. The man slowed his horse to a stop at the gate, his gaze fixed on her. His face was weathered, tanned by the sun, with a roughness that spoke of years spent in the harsh world of the frontier. There was no hostility in his eyes, just a calm, steady resolve. "Miss Thompson," he called out, his voice low but clear. Grace nodded slowly, not sure what to expect. "I'm Marshal Caleb Thornfield," the man continued, dismounting his horse with ease. "I've been sent to speak with you." The name sounded familiar, but Grace couldn't place it. She watched him carefully as he approached, noting the way his boots kicked up dust with each step. He wasn't carrying a weapon, but there was something about him that made her feel safe, as though he were a man who knew how to handle himself in any situation. "What can I do for you, Marshal?" Grace asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Caleb paused for a moment, studying her, before he spoke again. "I'm here about the Apache warriors who came to your farm a few days ago," he said, his tone serious. Grace's heart sank. She hadn't expected anyone to come asking about that. She had hoped it would be forgotten, lost in the passing days. "They came to thank you," Caleb continued. "I know you didn't ask for anything in return, but what you did for that child, for their tribe, it means something. They don't forget acts like that." Grace swallowed hard, trying to process his words. "I didn't do anything special," she said softly, shaking her head. "I just helped a child. I didn't know who he was or what his people would think. It was just the right thing to do." Caleb smiled, a slight, knowing smile that didn't reach his eyes. Sometimes, doing the right thing leads to consequences you can't predict. Grace looked down at the ground, feeling a mixture of confusion and guilt. What had she gotten herself into? She had never asked for any kind of reward, but now it seemed that her simple act of kindness had brought her more than she could handle. "What do they want from me?" Grace asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb's expression softened, and he stepped closer, his voice low. "They don't want anything, Grace. They came to offer you something. They want to honor you for what you did." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "This is for you," he said, handing it to her. Grace took the bundle from his hands, her fingers trembling slightly. She unwrapped the cloth, revealing a small leather pouch. She opened it carefully and found a string of beads inside, each one intricately carved with symbols she didn't recognize. There was also a small piece of parchment with a message written in neat, flowing script. "This is a token of their gratitude," Caleb explained. "They want you to know that you're not alone. They've watched over you, and they'll continue to do so, as long as you remain true to your heart." Grace's breath caught in her throat as she read the message. It was simple but powerful, a reminder that her actions had meant more than she could have ever imagined. As she looked up at Caleb, she realized that this was just the beginning of something much larger. She had crossed a line, stepped into a world where kindness and mercy could change lives, but she had no idea where it would take her. Caleb took a step back, tipping his hat as he prepared to leave. "Take care, Miss Thompson," he said softly. And remember, the world is a lot smaller than you think. Grace watched him ride off into the distance, the weight of the beads in her hand heavy with meaning. The farm was quiet again, but something had shifted. She had become part of something larger, something she could never have imagined when she first helped that child. And now, she was left to figure out what it all meant for her future. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet uncertainty. Grace Thompson continued her daily routine, tending to the fields and caring for the animals, but the weight of the small leather pouch and the beads inside it never left her mind. She often found herself staring at the objects, wondering if they meant more than she could understand. The warriors had left, and the farm had returned to its usual peaceful state, but Grace felt different. She no longer felt like the same girl who had helped that child across the creek. She had become a part of something larger, something that, deep down, she wasn't sure she was ready for. Each time she stepped outside, the familiar sounds of the wind in the trees, the birds overhead, and the rustling of the grass felt different, as if the world was watching her. One evening, as she sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames contrasting with the cool night air, Grace heard the unmistakable sound of hooves once again. This time, the sound wasn't distant, but closer, growing louder with each passing second. She stood up quickly, heart racing. Was it the Apache warriors again? Had something gone wrong? Her mind spun with possibilities as she moved toward the door. As the rider came into view, Grace's breath caught in her throat. It was Caleb Thornfield, the marshal she had met weeks earlier. He was riding toward her, his face set in a determined expression, his horse moving swiftly through the night. The quiet of the evening seemed to hold its breath as he approached. Grace felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest. What did he want now? Was he here to tell her something had gone wrong with the tribe, or had something happened to the child she had helped? As Caleb reached her front porch, he slowed his horse, dismounting with the same ease as before. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, Grace could see a flicker of something in his gaze, something deeper than just the business he had come to speak about. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice low and steady. "I hope I'm not disturbing you this late." Grace shook her head, her throat suddenly dry. "No, not at all. What brings you here, Marshal?" Caleb looked around, as if taking in the quiet beauty of the land before focusing back on her. "I've been sent by the Apache tribe," he said slowly. "They've been watching over you, as they promised. And they wanted me to deliver a message to you, one that couldn't wait any longer." Grace's heart skipped a beat. "A message?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "From the tribe?" Caleb nodded, his face serious. "Yes, it's about what you did for that child, the one you helped across the creek. They want you to understand that your actions have had a ripple effect. You've earned their trust, and more than that, you've earned their respect." Grace's mind raced. She had only helped a child. How could that lead to such a deep bond? She had expected nothing in return. Yet, here she was, standing face to face with Caleb, a messenger from a tribe she barely knew. "What do they want from me?" Grace asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Caleb took a deep breath, glancing down at the ground for a moment before meeting her gaze again. "They want you to come with me," he said. "There's a gathering. The tribe wants you to be there. It's not just to thank you. It's something more. They need you to be a part of something. Something they believe you have a role in, even though you may not understand it yet." Grace's heart pounded in her chest. A part of her wanted to refuse, to stay in the comfort of her own land, to keep her life simple. But another part, a deeper part of her, knew she couldn't ignore the pull of destiny that had been set in motion the moment she had helped that child. She had done the right thing, and now, it seemed, there was a larger path laid before her. "What kind of gathering?" Grace asked, trying to steady her nerves. Caleb hesitated before answering. "It's a council of the tribe. The leaders will be there, and they want to offer you something, but it's not just a gift. It's something more meaningful. Something that will change the course of your life, Miss Thompson." Grace felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. "You don't have to say anything yet," Caleb said gently. "I know it's a lot to take in, but the tribe believes you are part of something important. And they want you there to witness it, to be a part of it. They're not asking you to do anything you're not ready for." Grace stared at Caleb, his face unreadable, yet filled with a quiet understanding. She knew this was no ordinary request. It was an invitation into a world she had never imagined, one that was rooted in history, respect, and the kind of strength she had never known. "I'll go," Grace said finally, her voice firm, though she could feel the uncertainty creeping in. "But I need time to prepare. And I need to know what this is all about." Caleb nodded, a small, approving smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "You'll have all the time you need," he said. "I'll be here in the morning to take you. Rest for tonight, Grace. Tomorrow, we'll see where this path leads." As Caleb mounted his horse and rode off into the night, Grace stood there, watching him disappear into the darkness. The world seemed vast and uncertain, but for the first time in her life, Grace felt like she was on the verge of something big, something that could change her forever. She didn't know what awaited her, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was never going to be the same again. Grace woke early the next morning, the sun still low on the horizon, painting the sky with soft shades of pink and gold. The air was cool, the silence of the farm broken only by the distant calls of birds and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. She could feel the weight of the decision she had made the night before, her heart still racing with uncertainty. The invitation was a chance, a new path she hadn't expected, but now that she was standing on the edge of it, she wasn't sure she was ready. She glanced at the small leather pouch, still resting on the table where she had left it the night before. The beads inside it caught the light, shimmering in a way that felt almost like a silent promise, a reminder that her actions had set something in motion. But what? The world outside her farm had always seemed distant, a far-off place filled with strangers and stories. Now, it felt like that world was closing in on her. She had helped a child. That's all she had done. But it seemed that helping him had been the start of something much larger. She grabbed the pouch and tucked it into her coat pocket before heading outside. The horses were waiting, grazing near the barn. Caleb had said he would return to take her, but she didn't know what to expect. She had never been this far from her farm, never been a part of anything beyond the simple rhythms of daily life. The thought of meeting the tribe, seeing their leaders, and witnessing whatever this gathering was about left her feeling more than a little overwhelmed. But there was no turning back now. As she walked to the barn, the morning air felt sharp against her skin, and the weight of the pouch in her pocket seemed to grow heavier with every step. She saddled the horse in silence, her thoughts racing. What would they want from her? What role could someone like her play in the world of the Apache? She didn't have answers to those questions, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. Soon, she heard the sound of hooves, and before long, Caleb appeared, his horse moving steadily toward her. He was alone this time, his expression calm as always, but there was something in the way he rode, something that told Grace he understood more than he was letting on. When he stopped in front of her, he gave a small nod. "Ready?" he asked, his voice steady and reassuring. Grace nodded, though her throat felt tight. "I think so." Caleb didn't say anything else, just gave her a small, understanding smile, and together, they rode off, leaving the farm behind. The journey was quiet, with only the sound of their horses' hooves breaking the stillness. As they rode, Grace found herself glancing around, taking in the changing landscape. The fields and forests she had known all her life were slowly replaced by rocky terrain, wide open plains, and distant mountains. It was beautiful, but it was also unfamiliar, and it felt like the world was expanding around her, stretching out in ways she had never imagined. Caleb led the way, never hurrying, allowing Grace to take in everything around her. It was clear that he knew these lands well, his horse moving confidently across the varied terrain. The ride took several hours, and as the sun began to climb higher in the sky, Grace could feel the heat of the day beginning to settle in. They stopped once for water, and Caleb gave her a small nod toward a rocky outcrop in the distance. "We're almost there," he said. Grace could see the shadows of mountains in the distance, their peaks still covered with the last remnants of snow. There was something about those mountains that made her feel small, as though they were holding secrets older than time itself. She didn't ask where they were going, though she had many questions. The ride itself was enough of a journey for now. They continued, and by midday, they reached the base of the mountains, where a large, flat clearing opened up in front of them. Grace's heart skipped a beat as she saw the figures gathered in the distance. They weren't just the Apache she had seen before. This was something much larger. There were men and women, some on horseback, others standing by a circle of large stones. There was a sense of purpose in the air, a quiet hum that told Grace this was more than just a meeting. It was a gathering, a council of sorts. Caleb stopped his horse, looking back at Grace. "This is where it begins," he said softly. Grace swallowed hard, her throat dry. She had no idea what to expect, but there was something in Caleb's voice that made her feel like this was the right thing to do. She had helped that child, and now she was here, at the heart of something much bigger than herself. As they rode forward, she could feel the eyes of the gathered people on her. There was no hostility, only curiosity and respect. It was strange, being the center of attention in this way, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they were waiting for something, waiting for her to step into a role she didn't fully understand yet. Caleb guided her to the center of the gathering, where an older man stood, his face weathered by time, his hair silver and braided with beads. The man was tall, his posture straight, and there was a quiet strength about him that reminded Grace of the mountains themselves. He was the leader of the tribe, she realized, and as he stepped forward, the crowd grew silent. "Grace Thompson," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "You have shown us a kindness that we will never forget. But you are more than just a helper. You are a part of our story now." Grace felt a shiver run down her spine at his words. She didn't know what to say, so she simply nodded. "You will join us," the leader continued. "You have a place among us now, if you choose to accept it." Grace's heart raced. A place among them? What did that mean? Before she could ask, the leader raised his hand, and the rest of the tribe stepped forward, each one offering something to her. A bead, a piece of cloth, a symbol of their gratitude and their respect. It was overwhelming, and Grace felt her chest tighten as she realized that this was real. This wasn't just some passing moment. She was a part of something now, something that went far beyond the simple act of kindness she had shown so long ago. As the days passed, Grace Thompson's life began to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. The ceremony had been brief, yet every moment had left a mark on her. She had been accepted, not just by the tribe, but by something larger than herself, something that connected her to a world she had never known. It was overwhelming at first. The people of the tribe treated her with respect and kindness, yet there was a quiet expectation in their eyes, a sense of something unspoken, something that Grace couldn't quite grasp. The leader's words echoed in her mind. "You are a part of our story now." It was a strange feeling, knowing that she was no longer just the quiet farm girl, lost in the routine of her small life. She was part of something bigger. But what did that mean? Grace spent the next few days at the gathering, learning their ways, their traditions, and their language. The more she learned, the more she felt a deep connection to the land, to the people who had lived on it for centuries. It was as though she had stepped into a rhythm that was ancient, timeless, and she could feel it in her bones. Caleb remained by her side, guiding her through the complexities of the tribe's ways, offering wisdom without pressuring her to make any decisions. He was patient, steady, and every word he spoke seemed to carry the weight of experience. At night, they would sit by the fire, listening to the stories of the elders, stories of battles fought, of lands lost and regained, of the bond between the people and the earth. Grace found herself captivated by these tales, their beauty and their depth. She had always thought of herself as an outsider, a simple farm girl with nothing to offer. But now, surrounded by these people, she felt as though she had a place, a purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with vibrant hues of orange and pink, Grace found herself standing by the river, gazing at the water. It had become a place of quiet reflection for her, a place where she could think, where the noise of the world faded away. She ran her fingers through the cool water, feeling the flow move around her, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly connected to something. She wasn't just a witness to the world, she was a part of it. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Caleb approaching, his face soft with a hint of concern. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low. Grace nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back to the river. "I think I'm starting to understand," she said quietly. Caleb stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. "It takes time," he said, his voice steady. "But you're getting there." Grace felt a wave of gratitude for the man who had guided her through this new world, a world that now felt like home. But there was still a part of her that wasn't sure where she fit into it all. What was her role? What was she meant to do? Caleb turned to her, his eyes locking with hers. "You've already done more than most people ever will," he said softly. "You've shown kindness in a world that often forgets the power of that." Grace felt her heart swell at his words, but the uncertainty still lingered. "But is that enough?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Caleb's gaze softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's more than enough." In the days that followed, Grace found herself spending more time with the tribe. They taught her the old ways, their songs, their dances, their rituals. They shared their wisdom with her, showing her how to live in harmony with the land, how to listen to the earth and understand its language. It was a world far removed from the farm life she had known, but it was a world that called to her, a world that made her feel alive in a way she had never felt before. One evening, as she sat with the women of the tribe, learning the intricate art of weaving, Grace felt a sense of belonging she had never known. The laughter of the women, the soft hum of the loom, the flickering light of the fire, it all felt like a song she was learning to sing. She was no longer just the quiet farm girl. She was part of this community, part of this story. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Grace's transformation became more evident. She had found a strength within herself that she never knew existed, a strength that was tied not to physical power, but to the quiet resilience of her spirit. She had been brought here for a reason, and though she still didn't fully understand it, she knew that her journey was just beginning. And though the path ahead was uncertain, Grace felt ready to walk it, knowing that whatever came next, she was no longer alone. Grace sat by the fire one evening, the familiar crackle of the flames filling the silence. The days had grown warmer, and the nights still carried a hint of coolness, just enough to remind her that the seasons were shifting. Life within the tribe had become a rhythm she understood now, a quiet pulse that seemed to beat in harmony with the land itself. It was a life that felt both new and ancient, like stepping into a dream where everything made sense, even though she hadn't known it before. But tonight, there was a restlessness in the air. Grace felt it in the way the breeze stirred the leaves around her, the way the firelight flickered and danced, casting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. She had spent so many weeks learning, growing, and yet she felt like there was something she was still missing. A part of her still longed for answers, still wondered what her place in this world truly was. She had been accepted into the tribe, treated with respect and kindness, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting, something that was beyond her control. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw Caleb coming toward her, his steady gait never faltering. He had become a familiar presence in her life, a guide, a protector. His quiet wisdom had helped her navigate this world, and though she didn't fully understand everything yet, she trusted him. "Grace," Caleb said, his voice low and calm. "There is something you need to know." She looked at him, her heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" "The tribe is preparing for something," he said, settling beside her. "A decision. And your role in that decision is yet to be revealed." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. "What decision?" Caleb's gaze turned to the fire, his face shadowed in the flickering light. "It's something the leaders have been talking about for some time. A new path for the tribe. And you have become part of that path." Grace's breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers of something changing, something shifting within the tribe, but she had never imagined it would involve her. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. "Why me?" Caleb looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "You helped them," he said softly. "You showed them that kindness can lead to more than just survival. It can create change. And now, they believe you are the one who can help guide them through what's coming." Grace felt a wave of uncertainty wash over her. She had never wanted to be a leader, never asked for this responsibility. But it seemed that the tribe saw something in her that she couldn't see in herself. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do." Caleb reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to know everything. What you've done so far has already changed their lives. You've given them hope. And now, they want you to help them take the next step. But only when you're ready." Grace nodded slowly, her mind swirling with questions. "What happens next?" Caleb's expression softened, and he stood up, offering her a hand. "Tomorrow, the council will meet. They will decide what happens next for the tribe, and you will be there. But remember, Grace, this is not just about you. It's about all of us. We're all part of this. She stood up with him, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of what lay ahead felt heavy, but there was a sense of calm in Caleb's words. I don't know if I'm ready, she said again, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Caleb smiled, his eyes kind. None of us ever feel truly ready. But we stepped forward anyway. The fire crackled one last time, and the night seemed to hold its breath. Grace wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that whatever it was, she would face it with the strength she had found in herself, the strength that had come from helping that child so long ago. And as she stood beside Caleb, ready to take the next step, she realized that this was her story now, her part in something much larger than she had ever imagined. The morning of the council arrived sooner than Grace had expected. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind of tension that seemed to hang over the land like the promise of a storm. As she stood at the edge of the gathering, she could feel the weight of what was about to unfold. The tribe had assembled in the clearing, their faces calm, yet there was an energy that Grace could sense beneath the surface. It was as if they were waiting for something, or someone, to give them direction. Caleb stood beside her, his presence a steadying force, but even he seemed quieter than usual, his gaze fixed on the gathering ahead. Grace's heart pounded in her chest, a nervous rhythm that matched the fluttering of the birds in the trees. The elder leader, the man who had welcomed her into the tribe, was standing at the front of the assembly, his eyes scanning the crowd. There was a quiet strength in his posture, a command that demanded respect, even in silence. As he spoke, his voice was low and resonant, carrying across the field with ease. Today, we make a decision, he said, his words simple, but they seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 generations. A decision that will shape the future of our people. Grace felt the eyes of the tribe turn toward her, some curious, some expectant. She stood still, trying to steady her breath, trying to remember the words Caleb had shared with her the night before. You are a part of this decision, the elder continued, his gaze now locking with Grace's. The kindness you have shown to one of our own has opened a door that may lead us down a new path. Grace's chest tightened at his words. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't asked for anything in return for her actions. Yet here she was, standing at the center of this moment, a moment that felt both unfamiliar and inevitable. The elder raised his hand, and a hush fell over the crowd. What we choose today will affect not only our tribe, but the land we call home. It will change everything. And Grace Thompson, you will be part of this change. His voice softened, and he stepped closer to her. You have shown us the strength of your heart. But we need to know if you can stand with us, not just in kindness, but in action. Grace swallowed hard, her thoughts swirling like the dust in the wind. She wanted to say something, to explain herself, but the words wouldn't come. She had always believed in doing what was right, but now, it felt as though what was right had become something much bigger, something that would change everything she knew. Caleb stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Grace has already proven her heart, he said, his voice steady. Now, she must prove her strength. Not just to the tribe, but to herself. The elder nodded, as if he had been waiting for Caleb's words. We will not ask her to lead us, he said, his eyes moving back to Grace. But we will ask her to be part of what comes next, to stand with us as we face what lies ahead. Grace felt a sudden surge of emotion, a mixture of fear and resolve. She had never considered herself a leader, but the thought of walking away now, of not stepping up, felt like a betrayal. The land, the people, the way they had welcomed her, she couldn't turn her back on them. She took a deep breath, her voice shaking as she finally spoke. I don't know if I'm ready, she said, her words barely above a whisper. But I will stand with you. I will do what I can. The elder smiled, a slow, knowing smile. That is all we ask. And in that moment, Grace knew that she had made the right choice. She didn't have all the answers. She didn't know what would come next. But she was ready to face it, ready to stand beside these people who had shown her more than she had ever expected. As the council continued, Grace's heart steadied, and the uncertainty that had plagued her began to fade. She wasn't just a farm girl anymore. She was a part of something greater, something that was unfolding before her eyes. And whatever came next, she would face it with the strength she had found within herself. The days following the council meeting were filled with an uneasy stillness. Grace spent more time with the tribe, learning the ancient customs and traditions that had been passed down through generations. She had become more attuned to the land, the rhythm of nature, and the ways of the people who had always called it home. But even as she immersed herself in their world, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something that would challenge everything she had learned and tested the resolve she had only just begun to uncover. It was early one morning when Caleb approached her again. The sun had barely risen, and a cool breeze whispered through the trees. Grace was standing near the river, her fingers brushing against the water as she stared into the distance, lost in thought. Caleb's footsteps were quiet, but she sensed his presence before he spoke. "Grace," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of something important. She turned to face him, her heart quickening. "What is it?" she asked, her voice betraying the unease she felt inside. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "There's a situation," he began, his tone serious. "A group of settlers has moved closer to our lands. They're looking for land to claim, and they don't care much about the people who've lived here for generations." Grace's stomach tightened. She had heard stories about settlers, about the conflict that often arose between them and the native tribes. She had never imagined she would be caught in the middle of it. "What are they doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Caleb sighed, running a hand through his hair. "They've been pushing further into our territory, and now they're making demands. They want access to the river, to the land that's been ours for centuries." Grace could see the frustration in his eyes, but there was something else there too. Fear, maybe, or concern. "What do they want from us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To leave," Caleb replied flatly. "They want us to pack up and go. They believe they have a right to this land, and they'll do whatever it takes to claim it." Grace felt a wave of shock wash over her. She had heard stories of conflict, but the reality of it was different. This wasn't just something happening far away. It was here, in front of her, on the very land she had come to love. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Caleb's expression softened. "We have to stand together," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We've always fought to protect what's ours, and we'll do it again. But this time, we need more than just strength. We need to show them that we won't be pushed out." Grace took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. She had always believed in standing up for what was right, but she had never been faced with a decision like this. She wasn't a warrior, and she had never imagined herself as part of a fight like this. "What can I do?" she asked, feeling small in the face of the challenge ahead. Caleb placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. "You've already done more than most. You've shown us the power of kindness. Now, we need you to help us show them that we won't back down." Grace nodded slowly, though doubt still lingered in her chest. She didn't have the answers, and she didn't know what would happen next. But she understood one thing. This was her home now, and she couldn't let it go without standing up for it. "I'll do whatever I can," she said, her voice steady now, though her heart was still heavy. Caleb gave her a small nod, his eyes filled with gratitude. "We're stronger together," he said quietly, "and we'll face this together." The two of them stood there for a moment, the weight of what lay ahead settling in. Grace had never imagined she would find herself in the middle of something like this. But as she looked out over the land that had become hers in ways she never expected, she felt a deep sense of belonging. She was no longer just a farm girl. She was part of this world, part of these people, and she would do whatever it took to protect what she had come to call home. Grace woke the next morning with a heavy heart. The night had been restless, filled with uneasy dreams of settlers and the land being taken from them. As the first light of day filtered through the trees, she could hear the distant calls of birds and the rustling of the wind in the branches, but all she could think about was the council and the decision that awaited them. Caleb had told her the tribe would be standing together, but what did that truly mean? She wasn't a fighter, and though she had found strength in the tribe's ways, she still felt small in comparison to the warriors who had surrounded her since her arrival. Would her kindness truly be enough? As she made her way toward the center of the village, she noticed the air felt thicker than usual. The tribe was gathering, preparing for something that was about to unfold. The sound of footsteps echoed around her as more and more people made their way to the open space, where the council had been called. Grace could feel the eyes of the tribe on her as she joined them, their silent weight pressing on her shoulders. The leader, the elder who had welcomed her, stood at the front, his eyes scanning the crowd with a calm, steady gaze. When he spoke, his voice carried across the gathering, firm yet gentle. "Today, we make a stand," he said, his words simple but heavy with meaning. "The settlers are coming. They want our land, our water, and they will not stop until they have it. But we will not let them take what is ours." Grace's heart raced. The time had come. She had hoped for a peaceful resolution, but the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. She wasn't ready for this. She had thought that by being kind, she could make a difference, but now it seemed that kindness alone wasn't enough. The elder's eyes shifted to her, and for a moment, Grace felt the weight of his gaze. "Grace Thompson," he called, his voice carrying over the crowd. "You have shown us the strength of your heart. But today, we ask you to show us the strength of your will. Will you stand with us, not just in kindness, but in action?" Grace's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined that this would be asked of her. She had always thought of herself as a bystander, someone who watched from the sidelines. But now, she was being asked to step forward, to be part of something much larger than herself. Caleb, who had been standing quietly beside her, gave her a small nod. "You've already done so much," he said softly, his voice full of quiet encouragement. "Now, it's time to take the next step." Grace looked around at the tribe, their faces full of expectation. They weren't looking at her with judgment or doubt. They were waiting for her to make her choice. The pressure was immense, but Grace knew in her heart that there was no turning back now. She had helped the child when he had needed her. She had stepped into this world, and now it was time to stand with these people who had welcomed her. "I'll stand with you," Grace said, her voice steady, though her heart still pounded in her chest. The elder nodded, his expression softening just slightly. "Then you are one of us," he said simply. And with that, Grace knew that there was no turning back. Whatever came next, she would face it with the strength that had been awakened in her, the strength that had been growing with every day she spent with the tribe. She was no longer the quiet farm girl who had stumbled into this world by accident. She was part of something greater, and she would stand with the tribe to protect it, no matter what the future held. The day of the confrontation arrived with a heavy stillness in the air. Grace had never experienced a morning quite like this. The sun rose slowly, casting long shadows over the land as the tribe prepared for what was coming. The wind seemed to carry the weight of unspoken words, and even the birds, which normally filled the air with song, seemed to hold their breath. Grace stood at the edge of the clearing, watching as the warriors and the tribe's elders gathered, their faces set with determination. They were ready. Caleb approached her, his steady presence a comfort in the midst of her nervousness. His eyes were calm, yet there was something in the way he held himself that spoke volumes. "You're ready," he said quietly, though his voice was full of conviction. Grace looked at him, unsure of her own strength. "I don't know if I am," she admitted, her voice shaky. "But I have to be." Caleb nodded, his gaze softening. "That's all any of us can do. We stand together, and we face whatever comes." As the tribe began to move toward the edge of their land, Grace felt a surge of something inside her. It wasn't fear. No, it was something deeper, more primal. It was the realization that this land, this tribe, these people, had become her home, and she would stand beside them, not as an outsider, but as one of them. The settlers, Grace knew, would soon arrive. They had come for the land, for the water, and for the resources that the tribe had protected for generations. But the tribe was not willing to give up what was theirs without a fight. It wasn't a fight that would be won with weapons alone. It was a fight of wills, of resolve, of showing that this land had history, had meaning, and that it was worth protecting. Grace had come to understand that much. As the elders made their way toward the front of the group, Grace followed, her steps firm. She could feel the weight of the tribe's trust on her shoulders, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a calling. The sun was high in the sky by the time the settlers arrived, their wagons creaking as they slowly rolled toward the tribe's land. Grace stood at the front, next to Caleb and the elders, her heart pounding in her chest. The settlers were many, but the tribe was strong, united. The leader of the settlers, a man with a weathered face and eyes that spoke of greed and ambition, stepped forward, a smug smile on his face. "This land is now under the ownership of the settlers," he said, his voice carrying across the distance. "We've claimed it, and we'll take what's ours." The elder, standing tall beside Grace, stepped forward with calm authority. "This land has been ours for generations," he said, his voice unwavering. "And it will not be given to you. Not today, not ever." The settler's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered, his eyes narrowing. "You will leave. Or we'll make you leave." Caleb's hand rested lightly on Grace's shoulder, and she could feel the calm strength of his presence. "They think they can take what's ours," he said softly. "But they've underestimated us." Grace nodded, a surge of determination rising within her. She knew what they were asking of her, asking of all of them. They weren't just defending land. They were defending their way of life, their history, their connection to this place. The settlers may have thought they could intimidate the tribe, but they didn't know the power of a people who had lived in harmony with the land for centuries. The air around them seemed to grow heavier, and Grace felt a shift within herself. She was no longer just a farm girl, uncertain and unsure. She was a part of something much larger than herself. The tribe wasn't alone in this moment. They stood together, stronger than any force that could threaten them. The leader of the settlers opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the elder raised his hand, signaling for silence. "This land will not be taken from us," the elder said, his voice firm and resolute. "Not by force, not by threats. We will stand here, and we will protect it, as we always have." The settler, seeing the unwavering determination in the tribe's eyes, took a step back. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, the tension thick in the air. And then, without another word, the settlers turned and began to retreat, their wagons slowly rolling away. Grace watched them leave, her heart still racing, but now with a sense of triumph, of pride. The tribe had held their ground. They had won. As the settlers disappeared into the distance, Grace felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had done it. They had done it. The land was safe, for now. And as the tribe gathered around her, the elders smiling, Caleb giving her an approving nod, Grace knew one thing for certain. She was no longer just a visitor in this world. She was a part of it. She had found her place, and she would defend it with everything she had. In the days that followed, the atmosphere around the tribe shifted. The settlers had retreated, but the tension that had lingered in the air never quite dissipated. Grace could feel the undercurrent of uncertainty, a silent reminder that while they had won this battle, the war for their land was far from over. But there was also a quiet sense of pride that filled the tribe. They had stood together, defended what was theirs, and emerged victorious. For Grace, the experience had been a revelation. She had always believed that kindness was enough, that one small act could change the course of a life. But now, she saw that there was more to it. There was strength in standing up for what you believed in, even when it seemed impossible. She had discovered a part of herself she didn't know existed, a resilience that had been waiting to be awakened. As the tribe continued their daily lives, Grace found herself drawn more and more into their world. She spent time with the women, learning their crafts, their songs, and their stories. She listened to the elders, gaining wisdom from their years of experience. And she stood with the warriors, learning the ways of the land and the importance of protecting it. Caleb was always by her side, his presence a steadying influence. They spent hours together, talking about the future, about what the tribe needed, and about the changes that were coming. Grace found herself sharing her thoughts with him in a way she hadn't with anyone else. He listened patiently, never rushing her, always offering quiet counsel when she needed it. There were moments, late at night, when they sat by the fire together, and Grace would catch a glimpse of something in Caleb's eyes. It was a look of understanding, of shared experience, and in those moments, she realized that she had found not just a place, but a purpose. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned to shades of pink and gold, Caleb approached her with a serious look on his face. "We've been hearing rumors," he said quietly. "There are more settlers coming. They're gathering further west, and they're planning to make a push for the land." Grace's heart sank. She had known this wasn't over, but hearing it from Caleb made it feel real. The peaceful days they had enjoyed, the sense of security, all felt fragile now. "What are we going to do?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her chest. Caleb's expression was calm, but there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "We prepare," he said simply. "We don't wait for them to come to us. We show them that we're not going to back down. Not now, not ever." Grace nodded, though uncertainty still lingered. She had never been a fighter, never imagined she would be part of something like this. But she had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, it was standing firm in the face of it. The tribe gathered that evening, as they had so many times before, around the fire. The leaders spoke of strategy, of what needed to be done. The warriors discussed their plans, and the women prepared what they could for the journey ahead. Grace stood among them, a part of the collective resolve, her heart strong but her mind still uncertain. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would stand with these people, just as she had before. She wasn't just a visitor in their world anymore. She was one of them. As the night wore on, and the last embers of the fire flickered into the cold night air, Grace felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. There was uncertainty ahead, but she was no longer afraid of it. She had found her place, and no matter what came next, she knew she was ready to face it. The land, the tribe, and everything they stood for, this was her home now, and she would defend it with everything she had. The days passed slowly, the tension in the air palpable as the tribe prepared for what was to come. Grace had never felt such a heavy sense of anticipation. The settlers were not far now, and the tribe had made their preparations. There was a quiet resolve among the people, but underneath it all was a sense of unease. Grace could see it in the eyes of the elders, in the quiet conversations exchanged between the warriors, in the steady movements of the women as they prepared for the uncertain future. Caleb had been her constant presence throughout this time, guiding her, helping her understand the gravity of the situation. But there were moments, in the silence of the night, when she could see the weight in his own eyes. Even he could not predict what would happen next. The tribe had decided to make their stand in the heart of the land. They would defend it, not with force, but with the strength of their unity, with the power of their connection to the earth itself. Grace stood with them, her heart filled with both fear and determination. She had come so far, but there was still so much she didn't understand. The night before the settlers were to arrive, Grace found herself once again at the river, the same spot where she had stood many times before. It had become her place of reflection, a place where the noise of the world could fade, and she could think clearly. As she gazed at the water, she felt a hand on her shoulder. Turning, she saw Caleb standing beside her, his face set in that familiar calm expression. "You're ready," he said, his voice steady. Grace looked at him, uncertainty still lingering in her heart. "Am I?" she asked softly. Caleb nodded. "You've already shown your strength, Grace. You've proven yourself to the tribe. Now, you just have to trust in that strength." His words comforted her, but the weight of what was coming still pressed on her chest. "I don't know what to expect," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "None of us do," Caleb replied. "But we face it together. That's what makes us strong." Grace nodded, taking a deep breath. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer standing alone. The tribe had accepted her, and she had accepted them. Tomorrow, they would face the settlers together, and whatever happened, she would stand with them. The next day dawned cold and clear. The sun rose slowly over the land, casting long shadows across the earth. The tribe gathered, their faces a mixture of determination and quiet strength. Grace stood among them, her heart still racing, but her resolve firm. She had come to understand what it meant to fight for something bigger than herself. The settlers arrived at midday, their wagons creaking as they moved toward the tribe's land. The leader of the settlers, the same man Grace had seen before, stepped forward. His eyes were hard, his stance aggressive. But as he looked out at the tribe, his gaze faltered. He had expected resistance, but he had not expected this. This sense of unity, this strength in numbers. The elder stepped forward, his eyes steady as he addressed the settlers. "This land is not for sale," he said simply. "It never has been, and it never will be." The settlers' leader opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, Caleb stepped forward, standing tall beside the elder. His presence was calm, but it carried an undeniable strength. "You will not take what is ours," Caleb said, his voice firm. "We will protect this land with everything we have." Grace stood beside him, her heart swelling with pride. The settlers could see it now. The tribe was not going to back down. The land, the people, their way of life. It was not something that could be taken. The leader of the settlers looked around, his gaze shifting from the elder to the tribe, and finally, to Grace. He hesitated, his arrogance faltering in the face of the tribe's unity. For a moment, the silence was thick, heavy with the weight of the decision that hung in the air. Finally, the settlers' leader gave a sharp nod. "We will leave," he said, his voice low, as if the words tasted bitter in his mouth. And with that, the settlers turned, retreating from the land they had hoped to claim. As they disappeared into the distance, the tribe let out a collective breath. The battle had been won, not with weapons, but with strength, unity, and the unwavering resolve to protect what was theirs. Grace stood there, watching the settlers fade away, her heart still pounding in her chest. But now, there was a sense of peace settling over her. She had done it. They had done it. And for the first time, Grace truly felt that she belonged. The tribe had shown her what it meant to stand together, to protect what mattered, and in doing so, they had shown her the strength that lay within herself. As the sun began to set, casting its golden light over the land, Grace knew that no matter what came next, she would face it with the tribe, standing strong and united. As the days turned into weeks, Grace settled more deeply into the rhythm of the tribe. The land around her, once foreign and intimidating, now felt like home. She spent her mornings helping the women gather food and prepare meals, her afternoons working alongside the elders, learning their stories, and in the evenings, she often sat by the fire, reflecting on how much her life had changed. There were moments when she would look up at the stars, remembering her old life. On the farm, wondering if her parents would have recognized the woman she had become. But the longer she stayed, the less she thought of the past. This was her family now. The tribe, with its strength and unity, had shown her what it meant to truly belong, and the connection she had with them was something she had never known before. Caleb was still a steady presence in her life, and over time, their bond grew stronger. They would spend long hours talking about the future, about the land, and about the challenges they would face. Caleb never pushed her to take on more than she was ready for, but in his quiet way, he had become a mentor, teaching her the ways of the land, of leadership, and of perseverance. Grace had found a kind of peace with him, and in the stillness of their conversations, she began to realize how much she had come to rely on him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and red, Caleb called Grace to the center of the village. There was an air of solemnity about him that immediately put Grace on alert. "We have received word from the neighboring tribes," he said, his voice calm but filled with purpose. "They are gathering to discuss the future. They want us to be there." Grace nodded, her heart quickening. She had known this day would come, the day when the tribe would have to make decisions about their future, about the challenges that lay ahead. She had never been part of a council like this, never had to consider the larger picture of what it meant to protect not just the land, but the way of life that had sustained them for generations. "What do they want from us?" Grace asked, her voice steady despite the flutter of uncertainty in her chest. Caleb's gaze softened. "They want to hear from us, to know where we stand. The future is uncertain, and they believe we can help guide them through what is coming." Grace took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. This was it. This was the moment when everything she had learned, everything she had become, would be tested. She had never considered herself a leader, but in that moment, she realized that this was the role she had taken on. Without even realizing it. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firmer now, a sense of resolve settling over her. Caleb gave her a small, approving smile. "I know you are." The next day, the journey to the gathering began early. The tribe moved in a quiet procession, their faces set with purpose, their steps measured and sure. Grace rode alongside Caleb, her thoughts racing as she took in the landscape around them. The wide, open plains, the mountains in the distance, the rivers that cut through the land like veins. This was the land she had come to love, the land she had fought for, and she would do whatever it took to ensure that it remained theirs. When they reached the gathering, Grace was struck by the sheer number of people there. Representatives from different tribes stood in small groups, talking in hushed voices. There was a sense of unity, but also a tension that ran just beneath the surface. The future of their people was at stake, and the weight of that decision was felt by everyone. As the meeting began, the elders from each tribe took their seats, their faces somber and focused. The discussions were long and intense, each leader speaking of the challenges they faced, of the threats to their land, and the strength they would need to survive. Grace listened carefully, her mind absorbing every word. She had come a long way from the girl who had first stepped into this world, and now, as she sat among these leaders, she realized how much she had grown. They didn't just see her as an outsider anymore. She was part of the decision-making process. When it was finally her turn to speak, Grace stood, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no grand speech, no perfect words to offer. But she had something more important: honesty. "We have faced challenges before," she said, her voice steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "But we've always stood together. And we always will. This land is ours, and it will remain ours. But we must remember why we fight. It's not just for the land. It's for our way of life, for our children, for the future." Her words hung in the air for a moment, and then a quiet murmur of agreement spread through the gathered tribes. Grace felt a sense of pride swell within her. She had said what needed to be said, and she knew, in that moment, that this was just the beginning of a long road ahead. They were not alone in this fight. They were united, stronger than ever, and together, they would face whatever came next.